On a quiet spring evening in the suburbs of Balch Springs, Texas, a family's world was about to change forever. What began as an ordinary Saturday night ended in chaos and heartbreak. Sirens pierced the calm air, shouts echoed in the distance, and the sound of a single gunshot would silence the innocence of youth. In that moment, a young boy, full of promise, dreams, and the joy of being 15 years old, was taken from this world. His name was Jordan Edwards. Jordan wasn't just any teenager. He was the kind of young man parents are proud to raise, an honor student with an infectious smile, a devoted brother, and a bright future ahead. But in a matter of seconds, that future was stolen, leaving his family shattered and his community grappling for answers. At the center of this tragedy stood Officer Roy Oliver, a police officer sworn to protect and serve. But that night, his actions would ignite outrage across the nation. What led to the deadly decision? Was it fear? Misjudgment? Or something more deeply ingrained within the system meant to ensure justice? Balch Springs, a small suburban town just outside of Dallas, had always been a relatively quiet place. Families lived side by side, kids played in the streets, and life moved at a predictable rhythm. But on April 29, 2017, that peace was violently interrupted, and the town found itself thrust into the national spotlight. It began with a house party, teens gathering to celebrate the weekend, laughter spilling into the night air. Jordan and his brothers were there, just like any other group of kids looking to enjoy a break from school. But as the party grew louder, neighbors called the police, reporting a disturbance. Officers were dispatched. Tensions began to rise, and the Edwards brothers decided to leave before things escalated. What happened next was both unexpected and unthinkable. As Jordan sat in the passenger seat of a car with his brothers, heading away from the scene, Officer Oliver opened fire, striking the teenager in the head. He claimed the vehicle was a threat, but the facts that emerged later would tell a much different story. The gunshot didn't just end Jordan's life. It sparked a firestorm. A grieving family demanded answers. A community rallied for justice. And a nation was left asking the same question: how does this keep happening? This is not just a story of a single night, a single gunshot, or even a single town. It's a story of heartbreak, accountability, and the systemic failures that continue to plague communities across America. It's about Jordan Edwards, a boy whose life mattered, and the ripple effects of a tragedy that should never have happened. Stay with us as we uncover the events of that night, the investigation that followed, and the trial that would test the very fabric of justice. What happened on that April evening will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about safety, fairness, and trust in those we rely on to protect us. It was a warm Saturday evening on April 29, 2017. In Balch Springs, the air was filled with the sounds of teenagers enjoying a night of freedom, laughter, music, and conversations spilling out from a modest house party. These moments of joy and youth were fleeting, but no one could have predicted how quickly they would turn into tragedy. The house, like many others that night, hosted a gathering of students, celebrating the end of the school week. Inside, the party grew louder as more teens arrived, pushing the boundaries of what a small suburban neighborhood might tolerate. It didn't take long for calls to the police to begin. Reports of underage drinking and noise disturbances came through the dispatch, prompting officers to respond. Among them was Officer Roy Oliver. When the police arrived, the party atmosphere shifted abruptly. Music stopped, whispers spread, and the sense of carefree fun was replaced with unease. Teenagers, many of them black and brown, began to worry about the consequences of staying too long. Fearing that trouble might escalate, Jordan Edwards and his brothers made a decision: leave while they still could. Jordan, his older brother Vidal, and two of their friends climbed into a car. Jordan, always the responsible one, sat in the front passenger seat. They planned to head home, to put the night behind them, and escape any possibility of conflict. But the chaos that followed turned their cautious decision into a fatal mistake. The scene outside the house was tense. Officers moved through the crowd of teens, flashing lights and loud commands adding to the confusion. People ran in every direction. In the midst of this, as Jordan and his friends began to drive away, Officer Oliver perceived the vehicle as a threat. His actions in the seconds that followed would be questioned for years to come. Without hesitation, Oliver drew his weapon and fired multiple rounds into the car. One of those bullets shattered the passenger side window and struck Jordan Edwards in the head. The car jerked to a stop as his brothers screamed in horror. Their world forever changed in an instant. Jordan, the honor student, the promising young man with dreams of a brighter future, was gone. It is rare to meet with someone so absent from his inner life. Jordan's generally self-contained performance had always been well respected by the people he placed in charge of their services. The aftermath of Jordan Edwards' death was immediate and devastating. The Edwards family, blindsided by unimaginable grief, had to face the reality that their beloved son and brother was never coming home. Jordan's mother, Charmaine, would later describe her heartbreak as a wound that could never heal. Vidal, who had been sitting next to Jordan in the car, would carry the weight of that night's trauma for the rest of his life. The community of Balch Springs, though small, was quick to respond. Vigils were held, neighbors gathered, and anger simmered beneath the surface. The killing of an unarmed black teenager at the hands of law enforcement was not an isolated incident in America, but for this town, it struck a nerve. People demanded accountability, and they looked to the police for answers. Initially, the Balch Springs Police Department released a statement defending Oliver's actions, claiming the car had been reversing aggressively toward the officers. But in the days that followed, body camera footage would reveal a starkly different truth. The car had been moving away, not toward, the officers. The department retracted its initial account, and the community's outrage intensified. Officer Roy Oliver was quickly fired from the force, a rare move in cases like these. But for Jordan's family, losing his badge wasn't enough. They wanted justice, and they wanted answers. The national media picked up the story, amplifying the case and putting Balch Springs in the spotlight. The Edwards family's quiet life was replaced with news cameras, interviews, and public appearances as they fought to keep Jordan's name from being forgotten. As the case moved into the courts, Oliver was charged with murder. It was a groundbreaking decision. Most officers involved in shootings never faced criminal charges. But the road to justice was fraught with challenges. Oliver's defense argued that he had acted in fear for his life, a narrative often invoked in similar cases. The prosecution, however, painted a picture of recklessness, a disregard for protocol, and a lack of justification for taking a young boy's life. In the courtroom, the Edwards family sat through every excruciating detail. They listened as attorneys debated the value of their son's life, as witnesses recalled the chaos of that night, and as Oliver's own words were dissected. The weight of the trial was immense, not just for the family, but for the community that had come to see Jordan's death as a symbol of broader injustices. Through it all, the image of Jordan, his bright smile, his dreams of college and success, was a constant reminder of what had been lost. His brothers, who had witnessed the horror firsthand, shared their pain in interviews, their voices shaking as they described the moment their lives were forever changed. The media coverage brought both support and scrutiny. Some rallied behind the family, joining the call for accountability and reform. Others questioned whether Oliver's actions were the product of fear or something more insidious. The debate raged on, but for Jordan's family, the question was simple. Why did this have to happen? Excuse me for asking, but has anyone considered what it would be like to be deprived of sight? As the trial progressed, the tension grew. Would Oliver be convicted? Would justice be served for Jordan Edwards? Or would this case end like so many others, with an officer walking free and a family left to mourn alone? The answers lay ahead, but the road to them would test the strength of everyone involved. The courtroom was silent as the trial reached its pivotal moments. Every seat was filled, and outside the courthouse, protesters held signs bearing Jordan Edwards' face. The stakes were higher than ever. A guilty verdict would be a rare victory in cases of police-involved shootings, but anything less would feel like another devastating failure for the Edwards family and their supporters. Inside, the prosecution meticulously laid out its case. Body camera footage was played for the jury, showing the car moving away from the officers, not toward them, as Roy Oliver had claimed. The prosecution argued that Oliver's decision to fire his rifle into the car was not only reckless, but entirely unjustified. It wasn't fear for his life, they said, but a complete disregard for the sanctity of the life he took. Witnesses were called to the stand. Fellow officers testified about protocol, emphasizing that Oliver's actions did not align with their training. Experts broke down the footage frame by frame, showing there was no imminent threat to justify deadly force. And then came the testimony that would haunt the courtroom. Jordan's brother Vidal, who had been sitting next to him in the car that night. Vidal recounted the moments after the gunshot, with a voice trembling from emotion. He described the chaos, the blood, and the realization that his little brother was gone. His words hung heavy in the air, bringing some members of the jury to tears. The Edwards family clutched one another as Vidal spoke, their grief raw and visible for everyone in the room. Oliver's defense painted a starkly different picture. They argued that the officer had made a split-second decision in a high-stress situation. They claimed his actions were motivated by fear and a perceived threat, not malice. The defense team worked to humanize Oliver, describing him as a father and a husband who had dedicated his life to law enforcement. But their case struggled under the weight of the evidence. The closing arguments were emotional and charged. The prosecution implored the jury to think about Jordan Edwards, a 15-year-old boy with his entire life ahead of him. They asked the jury to send a message that reckless violence from those in power would not go unpunished. The defense urged the jury to consider the pressures of policing and to grant Oliver the benefit of the doubt. Finally, the jury began their deliberations. Hours turned into days, and the tension in the courthouse grew unbearable. The Edwards family waited anxiously, the weight of their hopes and fears almost too much to bear. Outside, supporters held vigils, their candles lighting up the night as they prayed for justice. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted. Roy Oliver was found guilty of murder, a rare and historic decision. The Edwards family cried tears of both relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but nothing could bring Jordan back. The jury's decision marked a turning point, not just for the family but for a system that so often failed to hold officers accountable. With the guilty verdict, the case moved to sentencing. The courtroom filled once more as the Edwards family prepared to hear the punishment for the man who had taken their son's life. Prosecutors argued for a severe sentence, emphasizing the irreversible damage done to Jordan's family and the community. The defense pleaded for leniency, asking the court to consider Oliver's years of service and the impact on his own family. For some, it felt like justice. For others, it wasn't nearly enough. The Edwards family expressed relief that Oliver would face consequences, but the pain of losing Jordan remained. His mother, Charmaine, said later that no sentence could ever fill the void left by her son's absence. Outside the courtroom, the community reacted with mixed emotions. Activists celebrated the rare conviction, seeing it as a step forward in the fight for police accountability. Others mourned the continued loss of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The case became a rallying cry, sparking renewed calls for reform and greater oversight of police practices. The ripple effects of Jordan's death were felt far beyond Balch Springs. His story became a symbol of the need for change, his name joining a tragic list of others whose lives were cut short under similar circumstances. In the years that followed, grassroots movements pushed for policies aimed at preventing future tragedies. Body camera footage became more widely mandated, and discussions about implicit bias and de-escalation training gained traction in police departments across the country. But for the Edwards family, the fight didn't end in the courtroom. They established scholarships in Jordan's name, ensuring his legacy would live on by supporting other young people in achieving their dreams. His story continued to inspire action, reminding people everywhere of the urgent need to protect the lives and futures of all children. As the dust settled, one truth remained. The loss of Jordan Edwards was a tragedy that should never have happened. His death forced a community and a nation to confront difficult questions about justice, accountability, and the role of those entrusted to protect and serve. And while the verdict brought a measure of closure, it also underscored the long road still ahead in the pursuit of true equality and fairness for all. Jordan Edwards' story did not end with the courtroom verdict. His life and his death became a catalyst for change, a rallying cry for justice in a nation grappling with the same question: how do we prevent this from happening again? For his family, the loss is a daily weight they carry, an absence that no verdict or sentence could ever fill. His mother often reflects on the bright future Jordan had ahead of him, a future filled with dreams of college, success, and the simple joys of growing up. His brothers, forever scarred by what they witnessed that night, live with the trauma of a moment that shattered their innocence. In the community of Balch Springs, the Edwards family's pain became the community's pain. Vigils, marches, and public forums brought people together, not just to mourn, but to demand something better. Conversations about police accountability grew louder, and Jordan's name became a symbol of the fight for reform. A name spoken alongside others like Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, and Trayvon Martin. But beyond the grief, beyond the outrage, Jordan's story offers a lesson, one that forces us to confront the value we place on human life. His death reminds us of the devastating cost of split-second decisions, the importance of transparency, and the urgent need for change within systems meant to protect us all. This case was not just about one boy or one officer. It was about a society wrestling with its own failures, its biases, and its need for accountability. It's about ensuring that the next Jordan Edwards can grow up without fear, that no other family has to endure this kind of loss. Jordan's story is not just a tragedy. It is a call to action. It's a reminder of the work that remains to bridge divides, to rebuild trust, and to create a justice system that truly serves everyone. His life mattered, and while his death leaves a wound that will never fully heal, it has also sparked a movement that carries his memory forward. Jordan Edwards' name will not be forgotten. His story is a somber reminder of the work still needed to bridge divides and ensure justice for all. The story of Jordan Edwards is not just one to be told, it's one to be acted upon. If his death has moved you, let it inspire you to join the conversation. Support organizations working toward police reform, advocate for change in your community, and hold those in power accountable for their actions. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can shape a better future. Engage with your neighbors, your lawmakers, and your local police departments. Start the dialogues that matter, and demand the justice and transparency we all deserve. Thank you for watching and being part of this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth stories that matter, stories that challenge us to think, reflect, and act. Join us next time as we explore another case that questions our pursuit of justice and what it means for our future. The fight for justice is long, but it's one we must never abandon. Until next time, let us remember Jordan Edwards and the lessons his life continues to teach us.